China's approach is very pragmatic. People have been saying, oh, DeepSeek did it out of necessity. There's obviously a GPU constraint, a hardware constraint in China, and that's not the thing they're hiding in many ways. The engineering genius and the engineering kind of innovation is really what set DeepSeek apart. And for sure, it challenged the global narrative around to get better AI, we need more GPUs, we need more money. It was just like chucking capital at it. And it definitely was a different approach because the capital ecosystem in China itself is also very different. And a lot of people talk about this like proof to concept. You have to prove your concept first in China to get even money. So for a lot of these startups, they really were not getting a lot of funding, frankly, before the DeepSeek moment. And to your point again, actually, it's because no one really knew it was going to have a strong ROI. So only the BETs that had money and understood the technology were backing it.
Welcome to Analyse Asia, the premier podcast dedicated to dissecting the pulse of business, technology, and media in Asia. I'm Bernard Leong, and today we are diving into the deep rise of generative AI in China. With me is Grace Shao, founder of the AI Proem Newsletter, a sharp observer of the China's tech scene, and also a former technology reporter with CNBC, CGTN, and also she has done crisis communications even for some of the major tech companies out there. And today, we're going to think about what are the deep insights on the interplay of innovation and geopolitics in the China AI ecosystem. So Grace, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bernard. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, and it's pretty interesting because you've been covering the China tech scene and the rise of all the generative AI companies. But I think it all dates back 3 years ago after ChatGPT has rise, and then everybody was asking, where's the China AI ChatGPT? Why did they miss that? So before we get to that, I want to start off, of course, your origin story. How did your career begin and what led you to the world of journalism and eventually now doing AI analysis and commentary on tech scenes?
I don't usually advertise this, but I studied finance from undergrad. So I actually started my career in finance. So it kind of brings everything together now where, I'm a business analyst. I think I don't position myself as a journalist anymore. And I provide analyses and insights on the happenings of a lot of the big tech as well as startup AI ecosystem in China and how they're commercializing and monetizing in China. So like I said, I studied finance, but then when I actually joined a hedge fund as a TMT analyst as an intern way back, I realized I just wasn't that good with numbers, frankly. And I was definitely a people person and I love storytelling. Had always been very extroverted and loved talking to all walks of life. So I actually studied financial journalism and moved to Beijing. My parents are from Beijing and I wanted to kind of understand that, their background, the history and the culture. And I got my first kind of trial there and it was great. I actually worked for CGTN in Beijing, which is actually the biggest broadcaster in China, and allowed me to travel across China, see the country from a complete different lens because I was able to even travel to like third tier, fourth tier cities, rural areas. And it really just made me fall in love with this part of the world and I stayed. So after that, like you mentioned, I did join CNBC in Singapore, mainly focusing on the APAC business and tech sector. But again, with a China focus, just given how relevant and present it is for this part of the world. A couple of years ago, I started working for Alibaba. So I was in their strategic communications department, mostly managing their like corporate PR as well as crisis management, etc. Actually, during the most tumultuous years. And I joined a consultancy and advise mostly tech firms. So companies you think of are like PayPal, Lenovo, Kuaishou, and Financial, etc. So that's like my solid 10 years. And those 10 years really just kind of shaped my interests and kind of where I'm at now. And I bring everything from working in-house and corporate to journalism, to analyzing companies from an investment perspective to my newsletter now.
So you have a very diverse background. I think you have done the ins and the outs of being on the CNBC side, the Alibaba side, and then now you're with your current setup. So what are the biggest takeaways you have taken from observing the tech sector, specifically in China, from your viewpoint?
Honestly, everything just moves so fast and it's ever evolving. I think just a personal anecdote, like during COVID, I was mostly in Hong Kong. I didn't go up to mainland for a couple of years. When I got there for the first time, I think in 3 years, I was trying to order food. And then I was asking the waitress, being like, excuse me, could I order food? She just looked at me like, you bizarre human, why are you speaking to me? Because at that point, everything was already digital. You're supposed to just scan your QR code on your table. order everything down. The only thing they were supposed to do was actually bring the food to you. And this is at a time when robots, waitresses weren't even implemented yet. So I think things are just so fast. Like digital payments are omnipresent. Like every time I go up, which is every couple months, like I'm like shocked by new technology or some kind of evolution in digital ecosystem.
Or my friend Patrick Maggie, the current author of Apple in China, said that is China speed.
Yeah.
So what inspired you to start up AI Proem, and how does your work now help to bridge the understanding of AI in China with the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think like I kind of mentioned, I've been on the different sides and, I've just watched and worked in these tech companies for so long. And I felt like there was so much that was being overlooked. And given that actually since 2018, the trade war broke out, right? Like a lot of stories I find that were kind of hijacked by the high level geopolitical narrative. And for someone who's so passionate about telling the stories of the businesses, of the innovation, and for someone on a personal level, I think I kind of straddle the two worlds of the West and the East, of China and the US. I just felt like there was more I could do to help bridge that knowledge gap. That's why I started AI Pro. I'm really just at first writing about what interested me and what interested people around me, mostly were academics and investors. And it kind of just took off on its own.
I think same here. I think even though I'm Singaporean, but culturally I'm Chinese, and then trying to think about how do we bridge the understanding. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, but let's pass away the politics, but just focus on the technology and what is really going on in China, which also comes before I get to the main subject of the day. I still have one more little question. So what would be the key lessons from your career journey that you can share with my audience?
Oh man, I mean, I'm still in a very humble beginning of starting AI Pro. I'm like, Bernard, you just saw I posted on LinkedIn yesterday. I've just hit my 1 year mark with this, right? So I think there's still so much for me to learn. But I think what's been so pleasantly surprising on this journey and compared to working for a lot of big platforms or big companies, it's just that when you keep an open mind and frankly be a bit shameless or, have thick skin, say yes to everything out there, a lot of surprises come to you. I think my advice would be just don't be scared to try new things. Say yes to everything. Well, not everything, but at least say yes to when people invite you to coffee chats, to conversations. You just never know what you can learn or what it'll lead to. And even, our conversation now is because you dropped a message to me on LinkedIn, and I frankly didn't know too much about your podcast at first, but I found this world of interesting interviews and, extremely high caliber people that you've talked to. And I've learned so much from your interview. So I would say definitely just be open-minded and say yes.
Thank you, and that's a great lesson to remember. So let's get to the main subject of the day. I want to talk about the rise of generative AI in China. Can you help me paint a picture? What does the generative AI landscape in China look like right now?
That's such a big question.
Yeah, we take a different because we are just right in the week before the big AI week in Shanghai, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, just maybe we start off, maybe think about the large language models. Let's talk about the foundation models. Everybody hears about DeepSeek, but maybe let's help me to dive a little bit with that picture with DeepSeek. The foundation models, like not just DeepSeek alone.
Yeah, and I think we can kind of talk about the different players that are involved in the LLM space. So first, obviously, there's the startups like you mentioned, DeepSeek, and Moonshot came out with Kimi to K2 last 2 weeks ago. That really kind of shook the world again. There's other LLM player startups, especially the original four tigers. These are Baichuan, Zhipu, Minimax, and Moonshot. And then we have the big tech players, similar to how the US is set up. We have like the BATs. So in this case, usually it's really referring to ByteDance, Alibaba, and Tencent.
Oh, Baidu also not involved now.
Yeah. It's involved. I just think it's at this point not as, frontier compared to others in terms of their models and their kind of applications. So first we kind of see the ecosystem like that. And then we have obviously also the smaller research labs that are still kind of incognito mode, and a lot of them spinning out of universities that you meet here and there, but they're still not, on the global map yet. So you kind of see that. And so in many ways, it's similar to US. You have the startups, you have the big tech. But I think a really big difference is that actually out of the startups, aside from DeepSeek, almost all of them have some kind of financial or partnership, like financial tie or partnership with one of the BATs. A lot of them been, financially backed by Alibaba or Tencent, who are the more aggressive investors and incubators in the internet space as well as AI space since 2023. So there's a lot of that. And then I think if you really look at the practicality of like how people kind of see how it's different from the US, if you have to compare it that way, is that Chinese people fundamentally are very pragmatic, I think. And I think, when you talk about these LLM research labs or whatnot, like there seems to be a more like a bigger push on them to try to commercialize or go to market quicker. The idea of AGI is obviously like the holy grail for everyone in this space right now. But I think in some ways, when I speak to people practicing in this space in like Silicon Valley versus China, is that the focus of, the philosophical, approach AGI in the US is a much bigger driver versus in China, it's like, how do we come up with best model? How do we come up with most efficient? How do we come up with the most cost effective one? And then how do we commercialize? So there's definitely that pragmatic approach. I think that's a very high level. And then I think another few things we can kind of touch on is like just like the open source and open weight kind of approach. And I know you want to talk about that.
Yeah. No. So I'm quite curious, right? So like, for example, the objective looks very different. It's not as if in the US when they talk about winning the AI race, it's not just about like getting into AGI. We don't want China to reach us, because, they might be able to beat us. But there wasn't that kind of race. There's a lot in China is actually specifically getting the AI out, getting into AGI, but how do we commercialize this AGI? How do we get into the hands of the common people? How do we make like different applications? But maybe I will flip the question a little bit since we talk first the foundation models. Maybe how about the applications layer? I mean, in the US, you can think of code development platforms like Cursor, Cognition Labs, which the guys behind Devin, or Windsurf, or maybe some of the other ones that they're specifically a little bit more, I'm trying to just recall, like Lovable, Bolt, which create websites, Gamma, presentations. How is it like in China from the applications layer for generative AI?
Yeah, I think we can touch on the US versus China narrative later, but honestly, I think it's such an unproductive word.
It's unproductive.
Anyway,
yeah, correct.
I know I'm like, I feel quite strongly about that. But I think
Totally agree.
I think from the application and, in some cases it's so similar, in some cases it's not, right? So we take a step back and go back to like just looking at the players. So on the BAT level, Alibaba itself is taking a much more like Microsoft-like kind of approach where, it has cloud infrastructure as like the core. Actually, that's like what they're trying to sell. End of the day, Alibaba Cloud has seen like double-digit growth over the last few quarters of earnings reports. I think, they're trying to sell to enterprise. They're trying to sell, their cloud services as well as their enterprise software, like, the add-ons of AI, AI enhanced efficiency to vendors and stores and merchants. So that's a very enterprise focused approach. Their consumer side is actually not like doing amazing. It's fine. I don't think they're putting that much resource on it, to be honest. Obviously, they have the Qwen series, the open source / open weight model that's really, taken up this like the limelight, as well as really been ranking high in the Hugging Face rankings. So that's Alibaba. I think in terms of ByteDance, Tencent, they're taking a very different approach. So we can kind of break it down a little bit. ByteDance has really been diligently trying to still compete on the frontier model end. They were kind of low key for a while, and pre-DeepSeek, if anything, they actually were kind of the best chatbot, or like pre-Kimi, they were the best chatbot. But they have an app called Doubao, and they hit, I believe, more than 400 MAU after aggressive marketing. The issue with it is I think there's a lack of functional adjacency to their core product. What I mean by that is, if you think about it, like you're swiping on Douyin, which is the equivalent of TikTok, right? You're not exactly like, interacting and saying, "Hey, chatbot, like tell me this, do this." Like it's more just like a pure
because Douyin is more like a video service, and it doesn't rely a lot of this kind of social interactions.
Exactly. It's more like you are consuming, right? You're not interacting. So they definitely also pushed out various AI like enhancement products within Douyin to kind of help with like their algo, with their e-commerce, etc. But in terms of Doubao, the chatbot itself did okay, and that's aggressive pushing. Now, Tencent took a complete different approach, which was really interesting, and I do think that was a pretty pivotal moment for China's kind of consumer application. And what happened was, they have their own LLM, but Tencent notoriously is known to work in silo. Like anyone who knows the China ecosystem is like they're so competitive internally. Like each team works on their own things, right? So basically, WeChat team just decided to integrate DeepSeek into their chatbot, and then they just skipped over Yuanbao, which is their LLM. And it's pretty crazy because what happened was like it did work in their favor because it goes back to they do have the functional adjacency and they do have the walled garden mode. Because what I mean by that is if you think about a WeChat, I mean, it's obviously more than a WhatsApp, but when you're chatting with a friend on WhatsApp, it's essentially a chat box. And it's so natural for you to just open up then a chat box with your ChatGPT like bot to ask questions, use a search function to do it, whatever, right? And on top of that, people in the West often don't understand or realize that WeChat is not just a social media app, it's literally a content platform. So people have run blogs, post videos, like it's this crazy place. It's kind of like YouTube plus like Medium plus Substack, everything plus all together in one. You have all this content available and this data available to Tencent that other people can't access. Because when you like Baidu search stuff on WeChat, it doesn't come out really. You have to search within WeChat. So they have all this huge advantage. So immediately they were able to tap into 1.2 billion users or something crazy like that. And it was kind of game over on the consumer end, right? In that sense. So they've done really well, I think, in terms of consumer application end, but for sure they're not like leading in frontier model development compared to Alibaba or ByteDance. Because ByteDance just recently came out with another series of Doubao LLMs that's very focused on text to image and text to video.
That's right.
And if you look at it, it's like who has better video and image like data than ByteDance, right?
Can I ask if am I interpreted this correctly? But ByteDance's strength is in video, audio, and of course not just Douyin itself, but also CapCut. I think a lot of people underestimate how much content creators are using CapCut from like so taking a long form content, cut it down into reels and post it into TikTok and all that kind of parts of it. But it seems to me that ByteDance is actually specializing towards the multimodal large language models where it's much better in audio or video. Am I getting that kind of specialization? And then somehow text-wise, they are not so good as compared to, say, your DeepSeek, your Qwen. I think there seems to be also very little understanding from the rest of the world on the Qwen models. I think DeepSeek heavily distilled, not just from Claude or OpenAI, but also from the Qwen models. And that's why their accuracy is so high.
Yeah, I think ByteDance seems like they made a pivot quite recently with the recent like April launch, but I think before that they were still trying to compete with Doubao on the tech side. I think, so Kuaishou is like another major short video player in China. It's not as prevalent in like North America, but it's actually quite big in LATAM and some of EMEA markets. But anyway, my point on Kuaishou is that they actually came out with some amazing products called Kling that were like supposedly comparable to Midjourney. I think that was maybe a triggering moment for ByteDance, and you did see them kind of go a bit low key for a few months, and then push out this amazing series of, like you said, image and video multimodal model like format. Yeah. So I think there's definitely each is playing into their own strength, and they obviously have different leverages and I think unique walled garden databases, because at the end of the day it's a data competition as well. And then they also have unique distribution. So I think if we take a step back again to talk about the kind of startup versus the big tech, I think right now what you're seeing is that the startups in China are struggling with their distribution and reach because you have to actually onboard new users on the consumer end versus, a lot of these big tech just have kind of capture this massive ecosystem. And to kind of give you some context, I read that for an average Chinese consumer, you open less than 10 applications a month because you can use like literally one Alipay or WeChat to do basically everything in your life. Like you can chat, you can pay your bills, you can get transportation, you can order food, you can do whatever. But in the West, mostly or at least in say North America and Europe, you're looking at anywhere upwards of 30 apps to finish your day-to-day. Like utility bill is one app, right? Like credit card bill is one app, like this bill is one app. And in that sense, like your ecosystem is like completely already owned by like one of these BATs in China. So You just have to capture your value in that.
Yeah, and that comes to this point that I always help to my Western counterparts when they ask me about how the super app works, and I tell them there's no chance for US to have a super app because your kind of company culture is context towards building this one thing and one thing very well, very perfect. Like your Google search is perfect, your Facebook is a social network. And when you start entrenching everyone's territory, it is an uphill battle because it is like the most state of the art. Whereas in China, you don't have that situation. There are some things they innovated on top, they leapfrog on top, and then it's very hard to copy. But they also have basically integrated the whole full stack, and that's why they can have a super app, and that's why also Southeast Asia would also have a super app. That's why Europe will also have a super app, but you will never see that happening in the US. Yeah, but coming back, right, you talk about consumer behavior, you talk about the enterprise needs. Maybe one question that always comes up is when ChatGPT first launched, right, many question that why didn't China launch it first? I mean, the transformer algorithm was available. So DeepSeek emerged and basically put all the counterparts in this new AI race. What lessons can we learn from just observing this DeepSeek moment change in the China AI ecosystem?
I mean, I don't know why Liang Wenfeng didn't want to release his model before OpenAI, right? I wish I knew, but I think, maybe there was just like legitimately not ready yet. But I think in terms of DeepSeek moment, a really interesting observation and, feedback I've heard from a lot of people in the tech industry in China right now is that it just like helped China internet revitalize, because we all know 2022 to 2024, essentially, China internet kind of hit a bit of a rough patch, right? Like the darlings were all kind of hit, like all the ADR dropped. I think, a lot of it was caused by domestic regulatory reasons. There was the anti-monopoly probes. There was a lot of like data security concerns. And then like Didi also had to like face delisting and everything, right? So we know all these different kind of pots of crises per se, but all of that accumulated together meant essentially the global capital world was really concerned about China internet. And I think kind of in a way, Chinese tech companies went into panic mode. And I think everyone kind of went back into their shells a little bit. No one really said much from a pure PR perspective. People just stopped talking, right? They're like, okay, it's better to not stick my head out than stick my head out and get hit. So there was a bit of that. And I think for sure there was a bit lacking energy. And then domestically after COVID, we also know that there was a lot of actually cuts, just like in the West, but there were like headcount cuts. There was a lot of talent retention issues. There was a lot of salary caps, like just all of these issues kind of added up that didn't feed into a very positive energy for the Chinese AI and tech sector. Now, DeepSeek definitely completely changed that narrative. I think whether it's from the media or it's from like companies themselves, they said it actually allowed the world to reshift their focus from China bad or China internet bad to finally go, innovation, like business, cost efficiency. And like there's all the things that were kind of overlooked for 2-3 years were finally kind of brought to the front and center again, and companies were able to kind of openly talk about what they've been developing. So like, for example, like Damwo Academy, that's with Alibaba, like they are in charge of all the like machine learning and LLM research and etc. They've been doing this for a while, right? Like it's not like DeepSeek came out and then Qwen just suddenly like churned out. Like its team's been around for a while. But I think riding off of like DeepSeek's kind of positive, I guess, PR vibe already, yeah, they were able to kind of really say, hey, look, we've actually been doing this as well. Look at Qwen. Like, I think it definitely was a pivotal moment. And when I speak to, senior executives at these tech companies, they say, look, we were so relieved because all of a sudden the media, whether it's like the Wall Street Journal or FT, they were able to talk about us as a real business again, versus just look at us as a weather wing for China's geopolitical issues or China's like consumers lackluster consumer consumption. That's what kind of that pivotal moment.
It's actually very interesting to also examine, because I'm technically trained, so I still have a couple of friends in the West, in Europe, China, and the US, and then we are all in technical forums. And when the DeepSeek paper first came out, even in late November, people were talking about it. And I can share a little anecdote was somebody actually has already proposed things like certain methods that DeepSeek were using and say, maybe we should try to do this at scale. But usually an American counterpart will just come and say, well, you don't really need to try these methods because we just need NVIDIA chips. That's all. Just throw money at the problem, and then it irritates everybody. And then now everybody just got like a shot in the face and say, "What? You mean you can do that?" I was like, "No, people told you so." It's just kind of amazing that one of the things that DeepSeek has really done is showing that you can make this cheaper to do. It's not really belongs to any one country, and there's a real horse race now. But I want to also ask, like, for example, after DeepSeek, you start to see Kimi and Manus AI. Even yesterday, Alibaba just put out a new Qwen model, and it was on the top of the leaderboard of Hugging Face. And I think it's starting to gather a lot of attention. Maybe what sets them apart in the China's AI ecosystem? Are there actually similar players? I heard of a company called, if I totally butchered it, is Uware is another one that's pretty well known. So what are the ones like we are missing, and what are the ones that are those ones that are gathering attention are really one step ahead than most of their rivals within China itself?
Yeah, I think first addressing your first bit of the kind of commentary about what DeepSeek really meant was the part where, like, I think to your point and to what I said earlier, China's approach is very pragmatic. And I think people have been saying, oh, like, DeepSeek did it out of necessity. There's obviously a GPU constraint, a hardware constraint in China, and that's not the thing they're hiding in many ways. The engineering genius and the engineering kind of innovation is really what set DeepSeek apart. And for sure, it challenged the global narrative around, to get better AI, we need more GPUs, we need more money. It was just like chucking capital at it. And it definitely was a different approach, because the capital ecosystem in China itself is also very different. And a lot of people talk about this like proof to concept. You have to prove your concept first in China to get even money. So for a lot of these startups, they really were not getting a lot of funding, frankly, before the DeepSeek moment. And to your point again, actually it's because no one really knew it was going to have a strong ROI. So only the BATs that had money and understood the technology were backing it. And that's also why that the BATs were the first round of investors and incubators in this space. So that's kind of to your point there. I think to your second bit about how Manus and Kimi, et cetera, they're quite different. How I see it, it'll be like I would separate it. I would say, let's talk about DeepSeek and Kimi first, and then Manus separately. I think they're very different.
That's right.
So I think the DeepSeek moonshot situation is that, like, it's very interesting because they're not anomalies. You're realizing that it's not like one-off, like, High Fly, which is like this group of genius that just found a way to make more cost-efficient frontier LLMs. It's actually that there are other research labs that are keep catching up. So I think one big difference comparing these to a lot of leading US startups right now in this space, or if you want to call them startups or not, but like say compared to the OpenAI and then Anthropics, is that they fully embrace open weight. So a lot of people call them open source, but you're more technical than I am. But in the sense of technicalities, are essentially open weight models. I think there's been a lot of discussion around this, and there's a pragmatic reason and a philosophical reason. Philosophically, I think honestly, Liang Wenfeng has come out, he's a media shy person, but he has come out to say he wants to attract the best talent. It's the best way to retain top talent. It's a perfect way to put the most frontier technology available in China in the hands of other innovators. He wants it to be massively adopted, and he wants to put Chinese innovators at the front of the global innovation lead, essentially. There's a very strong, I think, patriotic component to that. And then I think there's also a philosophical choice where he just believes that, and this is long debated in open source versus closed source, like communities, even in technology beyond AI, is that, like, is it better to share the technology and for more people to innovate on top of it, right? And to be scrutinized and, and to adopt? Or is it better to kind of have your proprietary information and data, everything closed up? So I think for him, it's a very personal philosophical choice to be open source. There's that. I think there's another thing which I found interesting is that a lot of the founders now in the AI space are actually quite young. They're born in the 80s or 90s. I think they grew up in a time frame where China really was rising economically and their soft power. And there's a lot of culture, social aspects to this too. So I think people were like, if I put this out there, I can prove that we're not copying. We are actually innovating. And that kind of like, you are just a copycatter, like, mentality was like, there's a chip on their shoulder, right? Because the generation before them were being called copycatters. And they're like, we want to prove ourselves that we are actually innovators. So there's always that, like, psychological, cultural aspect too. And then last but not least, which is the pragmatic reason, is it goes back to like distribution, right? So for them, it's like foundation models are becoming commodities. How they view it is and value will be accrued in the products and services built on top of them. So open sourcing, essentially in that sense, is a strategic decision. So you open source it, you basically utilize and leverage other people's distribution, create moats in that sense. Then you can have a really great model, but everyone will have to use your model eventually if you just continue to lead in your frontier model. So there's a few different reasons I think why they came out the way that they did. And it's definitely been a bit different from how the American research labs are approaching frontier models. In terms of Manus, I feel quite differently about. So I actually was lucky to get access code quite early on, and I tried it out. It's very cool. Like everything was moving super fast, the screens were going crazy, and clearly from a non-technical person. But at the end of the day, I think what it was, the product itself, honestly, from my personal usage and friends around me for research and simple tasks, was not that different from OpenAI's, like O4 or anything, or any of these kind of like leading agentic products. I think what they did really interestingly is the PR, actually. I think they definitely, first of all, they had a founder that was very not media shy. He was very eloquent in speaking in English, and he did a very strong PR push. This was very different from majority of the other startup founders, where a lot of them, are like nerdy, like researchers.
Yeah.
They get really media shy, and they're not coming out and talking about their own products. They didn't really go founder direct in that sense. And, people don't know about them as much. So first of all, they did a very strong consumer marketing and PR. Number two, they played into the scarcity kind of strategy. And like I said, for people who know, like they really weren't giving out the access codes even to some of the leading like top tier media globally. People were begging for them. They thought it was so exclusive. But really, like it was like it's a genius marketing strategy, right? Like, so I think they definitely rode that hype a little bit in the beginning. Not saying their product's not good. I'm just saying I don't think it was anything significantly better than the other players. And then I think another big thing that they've done differently now is that they've actually moved out to Singapore. I don't know if you know.
Yes, I know. They're in town. I would like to meet them and interview them.
Yeah.
If you ever talk to them, please let them know that there's a podcaster who actually covers a lot of Asia. I'm just joking, yeah. But I want to understand a little bit, like, I know Manus also ran on Claude 4.0 as well now, because the way how it executes its agentic workflows, because I look into all the like the computer lines that they were turning on. And I always have this when I teach a class, when I actually showcase Manus to the business leaders. What I always like to do is I put on my phone with the Manus app on, and I have the task that's running. I told this class, hey, let's just wait for a while. But I actually had my mobile phone on just to see what the app was actually doing. And then by the time, here are the results. And then everybody will have this like prestige moment. Wow. Kind of thing. But why do they decided to move out of China? I think that it's probably very competitive within China, but I think even they are actually quite in the lead in terms of agentic AI on that.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons. One is, we kind of touched on it earlier, but there was a huge pullout of US capital in China. So prior to 2022, I would say like a lot of US private equity firms and venture capital firms had like very large presence in China. The Sequoias and the Warburg Pincus of the world were all there. Unfortunately, I think due to geopolitical pressure as well as just, the sentiment back then, a lot of firms decided to pull out. There was that aspect where I think Manus definitely decided to take on US capital. So they took on Benchmark. Actually, I believe they were Benchmark's first China investment. It was quite a big story. Beyond that, obviously, I think you and I also know that there's actually American government mandates that don't allow, or I guess not mandates, but restrictions that don't allow US investment institutions to invest in AI, robotics, and what are called sensitive industries, so semiconductors, etc. So I think in that sense, there was definitely some kind of probably, discussion in the back end that made them have to leave. And then I think on a more company level, they really just took on the Singapore strategy. So what I mean by that is we've seen a lot of companies over the last couple of years that are Chinese founded or majority backed by either Chinese capital or researchers or talent or whatever. They have a Chinese heritage, let's put it this way, that moved their headquarters to Singapore or set up shop in Singapore. And their predominant market is not China, is the West. So the reason they did that is first, obviously, to kind of frankly go under the radar of sensitivity checks, whatnot. But another thing is it's just a pure PR IR thing, right? For raising capital, it's easier to say you're Singaporean versus Chinese if you're raising capital from the US. For PR approach, it's easier to also tell, consumers and stakeholders that you're actually Singaporean. So a lot of them are doing this, and what even PR professions have called it is called the China shedding strategy. They try to lean away from China. And Singapore is kind of the perfect place. I mean, you know it better than me, but I lived in Singapore briefly for a year. But look, it's the APAC hub for almost all big tech you think of in the world. So everything from ByteDance, Alibaba to like Meta and Netflix and like Google. So essentially it has all the talent in the world available, right? It has domestic talent, expat talent, and it has also a really strong advantage, which people again in the West sometimes overlook, is that like a lot of talent are bilingual in Mandarin and English. These are their native languages. And it just makes it so much easier for you to have Singaporean employees to have talked to someone sitting in Shanghai or Beijing in their mother tongue. And vice versa, you can have someone who speaks fluent English to talk to their maybe BD partners or their stakeholders in the West in English. So there's a lot of reasons for that. And on top of that, Singaporean government has been extremely welcoming and just like really trying to attract better talent and more companies. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why Singapore has benefited from this and become a very vital hub in Asia for tech and AI talent.
And remember that Bill Gurley, who is the former benchmark partner, now I think he's the LP, and came out in his own podcast with it in the BG2 podcast, where he said something along the lines that Manus is not in China, all the servers are outside China, from Singapore to Dubai, and he was like justifying the reason why they're not considered Chinese, and benchmark shouldn't be drawn into conversations like that. I think that whole rationalization is interesting for me. And of course, there's a lot of rumors of some of the ByteDance founders are living in Singapore. I probably know where they do, but that's a question for another day. Okay, let's talk about the China AI scene now. Are there any lesser known but promising companies or innovations within this whole generative AI or agentic AI space that we should be paying attention to, but they're very natively Chinese? Like, I will give one example from the hardware space, is Unitree Robotics. When I talk to my Western counterparts, I think they barely know what company is this, and yet it's one of the most talked about companies in China.
Yeah, I think Unitree is a perfect example, but actually I think they're selling more than like 50% of global humanoid robots right now. They're, if you know kind of company.
Yeah.
So actually on this topic, I think we're noticing that like Western media per se are picking up on the humanoid robot story. But I think China's always had a very strong lead in this. There's a few reasons for this, right? Like obviously just having the manufacturing supply chain all here for the last like 30, 40 years. I think in China right now, for a lot of humanoid robots, if you break it down, it's still the rechargeable batteries, it's lighter sensors, it's the motives, it's like all these little pieces that you basically had in your home appliances and the DJI drones and the EVs, etc. Right? And all of a sudden, because of the hype of humanoid robots globally, there's a lot of startups kind of trying to lean in on this, and they're trying to pull together all these moving parts. I was actually just talking to someone that works in supply chain yesterday. It was like, I really want to get deeper into understanding the supply chain of robotics. But right now, I feel like there's no major player that's talking about it yet because they're so fragmented, actually. But for sure, like your point, Unitree Robotics, like they're coming out with humanoid robots, quadruped robots, like these old dog
with
robots
wheels as well.
Yeah. And a lot of them are being sold for a third or a fourth of the price of a Boston Dynamics or a Figure AI. And essentially what I think right now is a lot of it, honestly, is, and I would say gimmicky, but it's still a very early stage. And this is from talking to people in the industry. And to your question, actually, like UBTech is a really big one that implementing into factories. They have a partnership with Geely, the car maker. And then, we have Galbot, that's really big. There's a few other players. I was at Beyond conference in Macau just a couple of months ago, which is a big AI robotic conference. And there were at least like 20, 30 different companies doing this, exhibiting the robots. They're somewhat the same. The reason I say there are still early stages because the UBTech executive was saying, actually, the reality right now is that we still just don't have enough 3D data. And for these robots, say 5 years ago,
Mm.
a lot of their movements are pre-trained, right? And
Yes,
pre-programmed.
correct.
So they can only really do, say, lift a glass up, right? And they put it down. Lift it up, put it down. They have like these single tasks or maybe max like 3 tasks they can do. To really implement the software into the hardware, integrate that right now, it's really challenging because LLM data is not the same kind of like LLMs are
Yeah.
not the same of the kind of software or model that we need for a robot.
Mm.
And to create this kind of 3D, even 4D data is extremely difficult. Essentially, you need scenario training and you need to collect in the real world. But naturally, we haven't been in a stage in our life that there's so much 4D data collected. So what all they can do right now in terms of software hardware integration at a very sophisticated level, the UBTech guy was saying, is that they can actually become companion bots or tutors. That is the best use case for consumers right now. Because actually, if you connect like a model into a robot and you have them sit beside a child, help them with like say history class or like, math tutoring, they can actually pull on the knowledge in their brains. But in terms of you want them to really like go into your homes and like fold the bed sheets and go up the stairs and mop the floors, this requires way too much like data that they just don't have right now to make them sophisticated and seamless to do a series of like actions. So there's that. But I think it's definitely a space that we can continue to watch. And I think China definitely in that sense have an advantage, just given how the whole supply chains in China. And even Jensen Huang, when he came to Hong Kong last November, he was doing a fireside chat at HUST. He said that, some of the best talent in hardware software integration engineering are all in the GBA area, which is called the Greater Bay Area, connects Shenzhen, Guangdong, and Hong Kong. It's because DJI is out here, SenseTime's actually Tencent's out here, Huawei's out here. So if you think about some of the best hardware companies are all in this area. On top of that, a lot of the manufacturing, like the factories of these spaces, are all in this area. And then you have a lot of very, sophisticated and leading academic institutions. So we can anticipate more there. And then in terms of other verticals, I think it's still quite fragmented, given that, we're still in a very early stage of Gen AI adoption. But I think, again, to the point of China being very pragmatic, is what you're seeing is a lot of startups just saying, hey, I'm not going to try to compete on LLMs. I'm going to compete in vertical integration. So you have a lot of healthcare startups, education startups. One company I did speak to recently, it was quite interesting. They do they're kind of like a mid journey, but actually for creatives. So like they charge very high subscription fees, but they're extremely sophisticated in their video production that you can actually just completely cut companies' ad costs. So like they would sell to B. So there's these kind of companies. There's companion bots that's extremely popular in Asia right now. So you can think about like fake boyfriends, fake girlfriends, which again, borderline, like, you need regulatory kind of control around that, especially with kids. And then, you have all these different like legal apps, etc. So I think there's definitely a lot to see, anticipate. But I think, like you mentioned, robotic hardware side is something that China potential will come up on top.
So what is the one thing you know about the China AI tech scene now that very few people do?
I don't know. I think everyone knows what I know.
I'm sure you know something that everyone knows. But from your observation, like for example, one of the things that maybe people don't realize, I mean, robotics is one, and any other interesting ones?
Yeah, I think it's two things. One is the small things and on the verticals is that actually healthcare AI and aggregate tech is extremely advanced, and it's something that a country as a whole top down is really encouraging as well. So, people adopting AI into agricultural, uses like, the technicalities, I'm not sure, but it's really like advancing the data analysis and implementing into agriculture. So to make your blueberries more plump, make your peaches more sweet, whatever. It's not the sexy one that consumers know about, but it's actually very advanced. And there's definitely a lot of companies operating this space. I think at a very high level narrative is, I wouldn't say people don't know. I just think it's something that is not talked about enough in the West, is that this is not an arms race end of the day. And I think that's something I want to talk about.
Totally agree. Spot on.
I think end of the day, look, we've gone through globalization, and technology and knowledge and talent at this point is so transferable. And the development of, the digital ecosystem cannot really just be stopped. And I think in terms of like physical boundaries and borders anymore. It's just not a very conducive or productive narrative for, I think, academics and innovators and business people. I understand there's obviously political reasons behind this narrative, given the kind of geopolitical narrative in the backdrop, but it's just really not really like, I don't know. I guess my point is I don't really get the point of it.
Yeah.
Because after you talk about it, it's still like, okay, everything is still moving around. There's still globalization. And the framing of China's AI development at a head-to-head context to the US really misses the point where at the end of the day, first of all, China's current deployment-led productivity kind of approach is really consumer facing. And the US is, also doing the same thing. I think for the business people and the tech leaders, end of the day, sometimes it's just advancing society and creating profitable businesses. Okay, there's that. And then on the bigger humanity level is that like, should we not be collaborating and thinking about how this technology is actually potentially very dangerous for our next generation, for humanity as a whole, and regulating it or understanding the safety kind of around it better? Like, putting in restrictions and everything, sure, it hinders development in some ways, but it's a very short-term approach. So I think this whole narrative around China versus the US just seems very unproductive for honestly the future generations.
And so what is the one question that you wish more people would ask you about AI in China then?
I think just approaching again just as a normal market. Like, I don't think China is like as a government has like a kind of crazy sci-fi dream that's different from the West. You know what I mean? Like some people ask me what's like the Chinese government's like, vision of AI? I was like, I don't think it's that different from whatever the American or the European or the whatever, I think it obviously is a technology that is extremely still in an early stage, but at the same time, it will be extremely vital for economic development, societal, kind of, I think, even prosperity, even potentially forming cultural norms in the future. And of course, national security and military. But it's just as like the internet was, right? And you can't just say, let's just close off the internet to everyone. I mean, it seems a bit, yeah. Anyway, so I think people should just see it more as another competitive market and treat the businesses coming out of China just as normal businesses.
So my traditional closing question, what would success mean to you and AI Proem in terms of covering and interpreting China and Asia's technology landscape? I shall not limit that to AI alone.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I talked about earlier, how I even started AI Proem on a professional level. I really hope I grow more insights. I think it's a flywheel at this point. The better coverage I write, the better access I have, and I truly believe this. There's been amazing people reaching out, whether they're investors or people in these companies, other startups or big tech, and they provided me so much insight and I've learned so much and opened my eyes. I think there's that. And I hope to continue to provide better write-ups for my readers. And that means really nuanced understandings of these technology development and the business development. From a personal level, I think, again, I just really hope to kind of bridge that gap in terms of cultural and social understanding as well. I really don't think it's productive to create these narratives or conflating country versus ethnicity versus technology versus, all these history, everything. As a Chinese Canadian, I don't want to see the rise of xenophobia. It's not a nice thing personally. So I think there's a lot of that as well. And I just hope there's more mutual understanding on both ends. But yeah, I think that would be what really I would consider a success.
That would be a good place to stop, but definitely won't be your last to be here. And we'll probably be talking more about the China's landscape, not just in AI, but also in technology as a whole. So Grace, many thanks for coming on the show. Any recommendations you have that inspire you recently?
I think, actually you can see I have this book. My good friend, Karen Howe, wrote this, and I really highly recommend it. It's called Empire of AI. And I think, she's a veteran journalist in AI. And, as much as AI Pro and myself and my team, we focus so much on the business strategy of a lot of these AI companies. It's sometimes really important to be reminded of the social consequences and environmental consequences of what this means. And even these like figureheads in AI right now. So Karen's book definitely addresses this. And I think it's a really valuable read for anyone. You mentioned BG2 podcast with Bill Gurley and Brad Grinster. And I think I really like their stuff. I think it's in the investment space coming in the West. I think it's very nuanced, especially on that. How actually they talk a lot about how the Chinese US AI arms race narrative doesn't make any sense. And
Yeah,
like they're really
actually, they are the only ones that are sane. I
yeah.
think they're actually talking about, I think they exactly understand how the Chinese landscape works. And they're trying to tell everyone else, just don't go overboard with this whole China versus US thing.
Yeah, I think they're just much more nuanced beyond, obviously have great analyses of like the business direction of everything, but I think they're also a lot more nuanced on the geopolitical take, and they don't want people to be carried away by that. I think they have a great podcast. Substack, I love Professor Kyle Chan's work. It's a lot more academic than my writing. He's a professor at Princeton. He writes a lot about China, US industrial components, economic setup, and he compares sometimes the two economies and why they've evolved into the way they are. I have to sometimes pause in the middle and read it, and breaking them in half because they're very long, but I recommend it. So yeah, I think those are probably like top of my mind, like a few of the things I've been really enjoying reading and consuming.
How do my audience find you? Please feel free to tell them where to subscribe to AI Proem.
Okay, so on Substack, it's AI Proem. Please check it out. You can follow me personally on LinkedIn. My name is Grace Shao, last name Shao. If you ever need to reach out to me, I would love to connect online or offline if you're Hong Kong for coffee, whether you're an investor, industry practitioner, academic, AI enthusiast, a student. I just find it very fascinating talking to different people. Do reach out to me via email. It's grace@proemcommunications.com. That's PROEM communications.com.
Just one
Thank
more.
you, Bernard.
Yeah, just one more last thing I'm going to ask. Are you going to be in the Shanghai AI conference next week for the World AI
I
conference?
actually won't be able to make it this time, but I did go last year. It should be pretty exciting. I was really looking forward to it, but actually I am about to have my second baby very soon.
Congratulations.
So I'm not,
yeah.
so I'm not allowed to fly anymore. Capping actually is just not letting me fly. So I was quite bummed about that, but I do have quite a few sources on the ground and people who will be sharing some insights, and I will be doing write-up for Substack.
Surprisingly to me, a lot of my business associates, people who are not even into AI, are actually bringing their families out of normal school days to go for the AI conference to inspire their kids. That is something that is really new to me. And for sure, next year I have to basically get myself on the ticket and fly to Shanghai myself to do this.
Oh, it's actually very vibrant. I went last year and this is pre-DeepSeek and it was packed, absolutely packed. And I think this year, post-DeepSeek, I've definitely heard more and more people from around the world flying in for it. And it's a good opportunity because I think all the AI companies and tech companies from the region or from the country are going to be coming in to WAIC. So I'm very jealous of the people who can actually go on the ground. I'm FOMOing so hard. But yeah, well, I will do a Substack write-up. So I will send it over to you.
Okay. Catch up. We will catch up again soon. For all those, you can definitely find us anywhere. So thank you, Grace, and we'll continue to chat.